It has no brain, no bones, and melts in heat. Yet this slippery reef dweller fuels a global trade worth billions, slipping from hand-woven nets into luxury markets half a world away. Along the coastlines of the Coral Triangle, the mornings begin before the sun dares rise. Men in wooden boats push off from sandy shores, paddling toward the reef flats with a practiced quiet. Beneath the surface, scattered across seagrass beds and coral rubble, lie the prize. Slow-moving, leathery bodies that look more like discarded rubber than high-value seafood. The sea cucumber is not caught with lines or traps. It is collected by hand, one at a time, in an underwater ritual that has remained unchanged for generations. Some are picked in ankle-deep tide pools, others by free divers who hold their breath for over a minute, scanning the reef floor like living periscopes. In these places, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, Kiribati, the animal is more than a resource. It's a legacy, passed from grandfather to grandson. The knowledge of where, when, and how to harvest them is held in stories, tides, and scars. They are called trepang in Indonesia, balatan in the Philippines, and dari in Fiji. But across cultures, one truth holds. Harvest them wrong, and they vanish. Too many removed too quickly, and the reef begins to change. Fewer filters, more algae, a slow suffocation of the seafloor. And yet, the pressure to harvest remains. Demand in China and Hong Kong continues to swell, driven by traditional medicine, luxury cuisine, and a belief in the cucumber's restorative powers. That demand pulls more than 70 countries into the trade. Some are rich in coastlines, others merely re-exporters. Middle points in a trade web as complex as any financial market. But the supply side always begins in small boats, where fishermen balance their future against each slippery catch. The challenge is immediate. Once caught, the sea cucumber begins to spoil within hours. Its body, up to 90% water, collapses on land. Without rapid processing, the animal melts from the inside, turning valuable harvest into foul-smelling waste. In coastal villages, the race begins not with customs paperwork, but with boiling pots, drying racks, and salt. The goal is simple: preserve the shape, lock in the texture, and reduce the weight before it ever leaves the beach. But not all beaches are equal. Remote islanders may lack clean water, consistent heat, or even shade. That variability affects quality. And in this trade, quality is everything. A first-grade dried sea cucumber can fetch 100 times more than its lower-grade twin. That's where the knowledge gets granular. How long to boil, how many times to rinse, whether to sun-dry or smoke-dry. Too much heat, and the skin blisters. Too little, and mold creeps in during transport. Every decision ripples outward, affecting shelf life, market value, and even whether a buyer will return next season. Meanwhile, marine officials face a mounting challenge. How do you regulate something that's harvested across 30,000 islands, much of it without paperwork? Illegal trade thrives in the gaps, smuggled across porous borders, mislabeled, or blended with legally caught stock. In some regions, the trade has fueled conflict and ecological collapse. In others, it's offered a rare pathway out of poverty. And so the question deepens: can a creature this vulnerable support a trade this large without breaking? The sea cucumber doesn't move fast, but around it, everything accelerates. Markets, enforcement, demand. In the silence of the reef, the stakes remain invisible, but from the edge of a tide pool to the floor of a seafood market, the pressure builds. And what follows next must match that pressure with precision. The transformation begins in heat. Not the tropical warmth of the reef, but the searing boil of cast-iron drums set over open flames. Within hours of harvest, sea cucumbers are gutted, scrubbed, and plunged into bubbling water. Each species has its own recipe, some boiled for minutes, others for nearly an hour. Too long, and they disintegrate. Too short, and bacteria survive, threatening spoilage later. This step is more than tradition. It's the first line of preservation. A heat-induced alchemy that stabilizes the animal AS tissue and starts the process of turning gelatin into trade. Once cooled and rinsed, The next phase unfolds on mats and screens, drying. Rows of cucumbers, now slightly shrunken and rubbery, are spread beneath the sun or smoked gently over low fires. This is not cosmetic. Drying removes up to 90% of the animal's weight, transforming a soggy, perishable product into something light, dense, and shelf-stable. The dried form, called bêche de mer, is the version that moves. It is the one that will be boxed, weighed, graded, and shipped. But not before scrutiny. Buyers test samples for elasticity, moisture, even scent. One off note, a hint of mildew or rot, can disqualify an entire shipment. For remote coastal communities, infrastructure is rarely perfect. Drying racks must be covered when rain comes. Fires must burn low and steady. A power outage can spoil batches mid-process. But innovation is creeping in. In parts of the Solomon Islands, solar-powered dehydration huts offer consistency where weather once ruled. In Fiji, cooperatives are piloting low-energy vacuum ovens. And in Malaysia, certification labs test batches for toxins and pathogens before export. These aren't luxuries. They're lifelines to high-paying markets where reputation is everything. Once processed, packaging takes over. Each dried cucumber is sorted by species, size, and grade, then sealed into vacuum bags or layered in lined boxes. Some are labeled and tagged for traceability, especially when bound for premium buyers in Singapore or Beijing. Others vanish into anonymous bulk shipments, sold by the ton and traded through middlemen. In ports like Jakarta, Cebu, and Port Moresby, containers fill with cargo that resembles nothing more than dark, brittle husks. But those husks may carry hundreds of thousands of dollars in value. Transport depends on form. Dried bêche de mer can travel slowly by sea freight in insulated containers. But when fresh or semi-dried products are involved, time accelerates. Cold chains snap into action. Products kept below 10 degrees Celsius, shipped by air, often within 48 hours of final processing. Each link is monitored. Temperature logs, customs declarations, phytosanitary certificates. 1 degree too warm, and mold can form. One delay at a checkpoint, and a shipment's value evaporates. Technology is starting to shape the trade. In some operations, QR-coded tags allow traceability back to the original harvest site. Blockchain platforms are testing ways to verify sustainable sourcing and prevent laundering of illegal catch. Meanwhile, AI systems analyze drying times and suggest optimal schedules based on humidity forecasts. These tools aren't widespread, but their presence is growing, nudging the trade from tradition toward precision. Still, human skill remains irreplaceable. A single processor may handle over 500 cucumbers a day, using fingertips to test dryness and smell. In grading rooms, buyers tap, squeeze, and bend each piece, searching for subtle signs of overprocessing or poor handling. It's a form of sensory calculus, where seconds of inspection determine whether a piece lands in a luxury restaurant or a discount bin. Once cleared, the sea cucumbers are shipped, loaded into pallets, assigned HS codes, declared under tariff schedules, and cleared through customs agents who may have never seen the animal alive. But the process is not over. In transit, every bump, every temperature shift matters. A cracked seal or humid hold can turn a shipment into waste. So the industry invests in packaging lined with moisture barriers, in humidity indicators that shift color with the slightest change. There is no margin for error. All of this, processing, preservation, packaging, is not about speed. It's about survival, not for the cucumber, which is long dead, but for its value. And in this trade, value only survives through discipline, because the final stop is not a warehouse. It's a chef's counter, a banquet hall, a plate that costs more than a week's wages. Getting there means every step must hold. In a banquet hall in Hangzhou, the lights are low and the table is set with precision. Servers glide between chairs carrying shallow bowls, steam curling upwards from a translucent broth. Centered within, delicately curled and almost glowing, is a sea cucumber. It arrives not as a creature, but as a symbol of wealth, longevity, refinement. No trace remains of the reef floor where it once pulsed gently beneath the waves. No hint lingers of the drying racks or the fingers that once pressed its body to test its firmness. It has been scrubbed, dried, transported, rehydrated, and finally coaxed back into softness over hours of simmering, just to reach this exact texture. That is what matters here. The body, not the story, but that story continues even as the cucumber is served. In processing facilities across the tropics, other batches are being soaked and softened. Some will be powdered into capsules sold in glass jars beside ginseng and deer antler. Others will be flash frozen and delivered to restaurants in Toronto or Seoul, where chefs describe them as ocean gelatin or mineral-rich meat. They do not taste like fish. They do not flake or crunch. What they offer is resistance, a yielding chew that's believed to nourish from within. For thousands of years, this has been their role, not just as food, but as function. Yet in the water, before they are caught, sea cucumbers are workers. They pass sand through their bodies, digesting organic material and leaving the seabed cleaner than they found it. They reduce nitrogen. They prevent dead zones. A healthy reef depends on them as much as on coral or algae, but they are easy to catch, slow to reproduce, and live in shallow areas close to shore. These facts have made them vulnerable. Across Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, reefs have been stripped. Some species have vanished entirely. Others survive only in protected zones or marine farms. In response, coastal communities are experimenting. In southern China, vast coastal zones now grow cucumbers in artificial ponds, where salinity, temperature, and feed are tightly managed. They are raised like crops, harvested after a year, and processed on-site. These farms do not look like the sea. They look like hatcheries, full of tanks and nets. But they offer volume. They ease pressure on wild stocks. In East Africa, community groups have built simple enclosures in shallow bays, where sea cucumbers are reared among seaweed and shellfish. It is slower, less controlled, but it provides dual income, harvest, and habitat repair. In many places, conservation is not a slogan, but a pattern of behavior. Some island villages close their reefs during spawning season. Others require permits for harvest or limit catches by family rather than species. These practices do not always make headlines, but they persist. In places with no refrigeration, no government subsidies, and no alternative income, protecting the sea cucumber is not about policy. It is about next year. One mistake, and the reef goes silent. One overharvest, and the market closes. Still, the market waits. Traders are fluent in fluctuation. When one species becomes scarce, another is promoted. When one region cracks down on exports, another opens. In large re-export hubs, shipments from across the Pacific and Indian Oceans arrive daily. The dried cucumbers are sorted, priced, and rerouted to meet demand. Some are split and treated to change their appearance. Others are soaked to add weight before reselling. Quality varies. Labels are changed. Unless rigorously tested, buyers often rely on visual cues alone: texture, color, elasticity. This has created space for mislabeling and fraud, especially for species that fetch higher prices. But enforcement is improving. DNA barcoding, once limited to researchers, is now available to exporters trying to prove provenance and to importers seeking authenticity. These shifts matter, because when a dried sea cucumber reaches its final destination, it is no longer a product. It is ceremony. In Chinese weddings, it symbolizes fertility. In celebratory banquets, it signifies respect. It may be served with abalone or black mushroom, or steamed in chicken broth until it nearly disappears into gelatin. It is not something consumed alone or quickly. It is something offered, something that carries meaning shaped by centuries of belief. And that meaning has kept the trade moving, even as the seas grow quieter. What is remarkable is not just that this fragile animal travels across the globe, it is that so many forces remain committed to keeping it moving, from divers who memorize tidal maps by heart, to processors who can hear the difference between a properly dried cucumber and one still holding moisture, to exporters building cold chains in places without stable power. Each plays a role in preserving something that, by all logic, shouldn't be transportable. What the sea cucumber lacks in form, it makes up in function, tradition, and a quiet kind of resilience. And as long as that holds, the trade will continue, soft-bodied, tightly packed, and more valuable than it looks. From coral shallows to polished banquet tables, the sea cucumber crosses cultures, currencies, and climates. Without ever changing shape, it is soft, slow, and easily spoiled, yet its value endures because generations have learned how to handle it with precision. Drying racks, boiling times, air cargo schedules. Each step is measured to protect what the ocean offers, but cannot replace. What seems simple on the plate is, in truth, a quiet feat of coordination. So when it arrives, glistening in broth or powdered in capsules, it carries more than flavor. It carries the rhythm of oceans, economies, and ancient care.